they finally called us, trying to be very friendly, by the way, because through contacts and through connections, they said, "I'm sorry, but do you have anyone in your family who's not Jewish?" So that we could put her in our roster as a non-Jew. That will be easier to fit in because they have numbers and they have quotas to fill. So this way, as a non-Jew, we could say that we have this number of people who are Jews and this number of people who are not Jewish, because we cannot have too many Jews in the best ballet academy in the world.
Welcome to the Immigrant Experience in America, an immigrant human library, where we amplify and humanize the experiences of immigrants in the United States and around the world. Listen in as we add another story to our immigrant human library. Hello, my friends. I am happy to join you on another episode of the Immigrant Experience in America, where we amplify and humanize the experiences of immigrants living in the United States and around the world. Today, we are bringing to you what I would like to say an exciting episode, because I'm so looking forward to having this conversation about a great topic, a very salient topic that is impacting high achieving immigrant women and a lot of women in the United States. And I would venture to say a lot of women who are working in the Western world, full-time mothers, full-time work professionals, and juggling so many things. So I'm so looking forward to speaking to our guest today. Welcome, and please introduce yourself, Anya.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Simone, for inviting me. Very, very gracious of you. So my name is Anya Gillinson, and I'm an attorney by trade, but I'm also a writer. So this is actually, I've just published my second book. My first book was a poetry book in Russian, but this is my first prose in English. So, dreaming in Russian.
Very good. Excited to hear more about it. If you don't mind, Anya, can you tell us a bit about who is Anya and share with our audience, what brings you to the United States? Give us a sense for what life was like back in Russia prior to arriving here.
Well, I'm Russian. I'm a Russian Jew. I came here almost 33 years ago. I was a teenager on the cusp of turning 16 years old. And one thing I always tell people, it was not gold rush that brought us here. So, I come from a family. My father was a physician. He was a very renowned doctor in the Soviet Union. He was a man for all seasons, so to speak, a brilliant diagnostician and a physician. He was the only one in the Soviet Union who actually treated and cured asthma, which was a prevalent illness in the Soviet Union at the time. And his father, my grandfather, was a surgeon, so it was very medical family on my dad's side. But what my father did, what was so unusual, because the system did not allow for people like him to really freely practice his trade the way he wanted to practice it in the Soviet hospitals, in medical schools. So he basically, but he was successful in treating patients, he basically just left the establishment and started practicing privately, which was a taboo. It wasn't just a taboo, it was illegal. But when you can cure people who are very, very sick, you cannot turn them away. No, he could have been, and he was being denounced. People threatened to denounce him. On top of it, he was Jewish, and Jews were under constant threat of being denounced just by virtue of being Jewish anyway. But he wasn't afraid, because those who were threatening to denounce him and tried to denounce him ended up in his room, in his office, as patients. So he became a very powerful and wealthy man. His patients were everybody: neighbors, peasants, Nobel Prize winners, prostitutes, inmates, major government officials. And people loved him. And I described this in the book. He was an incredible human being. But with all that, he deplored and he hated and loathed the system in which he lived. He was a radical, a dissident in his soul. He spoke about it. He taught me to think like that. He was an individualist, in the best sense of this word. He spoke fluent English. In the 70s, in his 30s, he hired an American. He found an American in the Soviet Union to teach him English. He spoke fluent English. He sent me, when it was time for me to go to school, he sent me to an English school, the best in Moscow, so that I could speak English. And he brought me up thinking differently about America when everybody was afraid of this country. He was not. He wanted to love this country. He dreamt about this country. He taught me to dream about this country. And also, which is a different part of the conversation, Israel, because we were Jews. He told me I was Jewish, and he told me to never be afraid of it and to always be proud of it. And that was my father. And then there was my mom, who was a concert pianist, professional musician, came from a family of performing artists, and very famous family in the Soviet Union as well, but a very different cast of characters. My father, America was the country of his dreams. He managed to come here with my mom in 1990 as tourists, which was, they were the first tourists to come. It was right after perestroika, and people could finally travel. But on the fifth day of their travels here, they were attacked. It was like as randomly, as a freak accident, and my father shielded my mother from a bullet and was murdered while shielding her. And he was 47 years old. It was a huge story all over the country, all over the Soviet Union. It was reported on the Voice of America, all the news. My mom became a very young widow, and I was 13. My sister was 12. We were in Russia with our grandparents, and my father's life ended in the country of his dreams. So from, a random mugger criminal, 23-year-old. So, and yet we did come here 2 years after his death and built our lives here. And I describe all of this. And my father was, and as I say, he was our king. He was our vision. Through his eyes, we lived our lives, we built our lives, and we still, 34 years later, we I see, and I know my mom does, and envision our future and see through our present through his eyes.
Yes, wow. Sounds like a very special, influential person. He lived fully for those
Yes.
43
Yeah.
years, didn't he? Wow. So my condolences for your loss. And I wonder what it was like for you guys growing up. Like, it sounds like for you, you had freedoms. You were able to go to school, the type of school that your dad elected to send you because he had financial means.
No, well, you didn't pay for school in Russia. What you needed was connections. I mean, all schools were
Mm.
free, education was free, medicine was free. Now, in terms of medicine, it wasn't good medicine. You couldn't, no money, nothing could buy you good medicine unless you had connections. So, and of course, if you had connections, if you were in the government, if you were a very famous person, you could go to those special places that they were linked to, those particular places where governmental officials went, but you had to have special connections. Now, as a Soviet doctor, my father, and a Jew, he would never, ordinarily he wouldn't have had connections like this, but only by virtue of becoming a very unusually in a powerful person through a very unusual way, he of course had those connections. And of course, because he had also money, because people came to him and paid live money, cash, the money nobody made in Russia in such a way, he could of course buy gifts for people, he could bribe people, and which bribery was open, it was normal, it was a way of living. He could build personal connections in Russia went a long way. This is what's very different between this society, American Western society, and Russian society. Despite brutality, despite a certain degree of different type of morality or immorality, people in the Soviet Union, in Russia, understand the value of a personal relationship. and they will meet you halfway or full way. You can go and open someone's door and talk to them, and they will sympathize and empathize with you on a very different level. And it's not just about the money, it's not just about power, it's about other things, but power of course as well. Now for us, I lived my family was very different. So I don't know who your guests were. We lived in a bubble, because of who we were. So my life, of course, was different. I went to an amazing school. I mean, my school was best. I ordinarily would not be able to access a school like that because I lived in a different neighborhood. The school, again, was free. It was the best school, but it was free. But people who would have access to a school like that, it was, again, it was a nomenclature type, ministers, diplomats, very. So again, the daughter of a regular doctor, so to speak, would not be able to go to a school like this. But my father, with his charm, with his connections, waltzed into a school like that, and he said, "I don't just want a regular English specialized school. I want to have the best English school in Moscow." He waltzed into that school, presented himself with flowers. He said, "I want to speak to a principal, and I also want the best teacher for my daughter." No one spoke like that in the Soviet Union. Nobody had that. And people are, there's a shock value also.
Mm.
So sometimes, and people accepted him. They had no choice. So and but of course, but that was also my generation. But of course, for Jews in general, there were quotas. Jews in general were not accepted to schools. They had to work 10 times harder to get anywhere. My sister, who was a ballerina, who had to go, eventually went into professional ballet academy. There was only one in Moscow, one in St. Petersburg. They were the best in the world. You had to, and to get there to get in was impossible, not because of, forget your ethnic origin or national origin. It was just professionally, you had to be perfect. And then they looked, of course, at who you are. Now, Jews, by my nationality, yeah, my citizenship was Soviet, but my nationality was Jewish. So in our passport, we had a paragraph that stated that nationality, and that defined everything for people like me for the rest of my life. Not in a good way, in a negative way. That meant that when I were to go into university, that was counted against me. So, and when my sister was entering into her ballet academy, after she had passed those three exams that she had to pass, that were just wrenching, terrible examinations that she had, very, very difficult. They finally called us, trying to be very friendly, by the way, because through contacts and through connections, they said, "I'm sorry, but do you have anyone in your family who is not Jewish?" So that we could put her in our roster as a non-Jew. That will be easier to fit in because they have numbers and they have quotas to fill. So this way, as a non-Jew, we could say that we have this number of people who are Jews and this number of people who are not Jewish, because we cannot have too many Jews in the best ballet academy in the world. And my father, because lots of Jewish families, they use the fact with the mixed marriages that, okay, if the mother is not Jewish and the father is Jewish, we could put her as a non-Jewish child. So the fact is, everyone in our family was Jewish inside and out. And my father, even, even if he would have desired, he wouldn't have been able to say no. But lots of people hid that fact. But my father, being my father, he said, "I'm sorry, but no, you're going to write her as a Jew, and this is who she is." So, and this is how people lived. They lived like that. I mean, it was much more difficult for my dad, of course, in his
Mm.
time when he was in the medical school, and when he had to enter his medical school, when he had to graduate, when he had to write a dissertation, he had to do it. There were horrendous difficulties for him as a Jewish person. despite the fact that his father was a famous and respected surgeon who had fought for the Soviet Union in 3 wars as a surgeon. It didn't matter. So, it was just like in this country, with America has its demon with racism. In the Soviet Union, this demon had never of horrendous anti-Semitism. It had never left the country, whether it was in the revolutionary days, post-revolutionary days. It's like a chameleon. It's taken different colors. So, but so it's in the kind of the DNA of the country, for us.
Yes. Thank you for the context. Quite different. And interestingly, despite having means, second time I'm hearing of a Jewish person in that part of the world and getting a sense for just how you could probably speak to a Black person who's been here for generation and they would probably sound exactly like you. Oh my goodness, such a sad reality, but it's the world that we live in. Okay, so tragedy happens to your dad, and then you all come 2 years later. What was it like, or what was that decision? How did you guys get to the decision that yes, you will go to this country that your father always wanted to go? Learned, prepared you guys for speaking English. Like, how did you get to that decision that America was the place for you to? Well, certainly Russia wasn't the best place to be in, but why America?
Well, because America was still, in my mom's eyes, well, first of all, for us as a family, America was still the country of my father's dreams. It was always in the back of my mom's eyes, no matter what. Russia was a very difficult place to be at that time. It was 1990, that's when my father died. So 1991, Russia was collapsing. 1991, that was Soviet Union had finished its existence. Gorbachev had abolished. I mean, had stepped down. So there was a total crash of economy. It was the country was in disarray. So our physically, financially, our existence was coming like physically to an actual end. And I, as a little girl, as a teenager, yes, we lived in a palatial apartment in the center of Moscow, but our breadwinner was gone. So I was realizing intuitively and kind of, with my skin, I was thinking, what are we going to do? I actually went into my mom's room one day, not long after my father's funeral, even way before we left. I said, Mom, how are we going to live? I mean, emotionally, I was completely decapitated. But even on the finance, I started thinking, my father is gone, and what are we going to do? Who is going to be how are we going to eat? And what is this all? Because we only had cash. There was no banking system, as we know the banking system in America. There was no savings. There was no credit. There was nothing. We had what my father had and what he was making. So, and my mom told me then, she turned to me and she said, Anya, I promise you, we're going to live the way we always lived. And I believed her because of the way she said that to me. She always had that kind of white lie, for us to always feel safe. And she had accomplished that through whatever difficult, no matter what. And I described that in the book. Throughout the book, it's always been my mom. But eventually we decided that in Russia during those days our life would have been horrendous. We would have never been able to survive. This is the beginning of the Wild East, that was completely unfit for a widow with 2 daughters, a concert pianist
Mm.
nobody needed, and 2 teenage daughters. So, and we made the decision to, with the help of one very clever person who was my father's friend who lived in America, that he basically just told you have to make a financially savvy decision. You have this beautiful apartment, and that was built and created by my dad, and it's going to help you live in America. It can sustain you in a very good way. And at that time, it was very prosaic, but it was very practical, and it was a smart thing to do. So in addition to which, we knew it was absolutely that's what my father wanted for us. And people many times they asked us how, oh, how could you go back to America? This was your, well, this is the country where that had taken your dad away, and this is this. But the first thing I remember my mom told us when she came back to Russia with my dad's body in in a coffin, and all the horror, that grotesque scene. She still, one thing she kept talking about was the reaction of people to the tragedy, and the reaction of Americans to the tragedy, the attitude, the sympathy, the empathy of the people, and how they treated her. And it was because the story was everywhere. Every day, the Post, the Times, other papers, her face was everywhere. My dad's face was everywhere. People recognized her. And they all came to her. They recognized her on the streets, janitors, private detectives, lawyers, journalists, people in the courtroom, because they found that criminal right pretty quickly, so she had to be in the courtroom and everything. Nurses, doctor, everybody. That the kindness and the taking care of her part, that was incredible. And that was exactly what my father used to talk about without ever being in America. But he
Mm.
knew what Americans were like. He knew that a slightly naive, slightly, but very innocent part about Americans, their willingness to help, their willingness to feel for you and with you. And my mom thought that he was not wrong about that. And she talked about it so much, and she said, yes, well, that's America too, as well. So she, so that didn't deter her, despite the horror. So and that, and we came to Manhattan, the place where that I imagined I wanted to live, and our life began here.
Wow, wow. So take me through the adjustment. What level of English did you have were you 15 at this time?
I was August 3rd, 1992, we arrived. I was 15. August 7th, I turned 16. My sister was exactly 1 year, 1 month younger than me. So it was not, I was supposed to actually go. A year before, I came to America on an exchange program to Westport in Connecticut. There was a high school in Westport. So people knew me there, and they had invited me to finish high school there in Westport, Connecticut, because I only had 1 year of high school to finish, even though I was younger than everyone. But they said our curriculum in Russia pretty much corresponded to the senior year. So, and we thought that would be a good thing for me to do. My Connecticut, Westport, New York were not too far away. I live in the family I knew. So I was going to go and stay in Westport for a year, for that year. And my mom and my sister with our friend we're going to live in New York City. My sister had to continue her ballet studies at Juilliard and go to a private school. It was much more difficult for my sister, but she did her own thing there. But unfortunately, my Westport experience was not a good one, because
Mm.
well, in terms of English, funny thing about English, yes, I spoke English. I had good grammar, I had vocabulary, but it was not colloquial, and I felt very frustrated that I had to adjust to a whole different language and way of speaking the language. But partly, I think the problem was that I lived in Connecticut in Westport, not in New York City, because different way of living life and different way of people looking at you. I went to the school where people knew me a year before, but yeah, I was a guest and everybody was very friendly, and you treated different. Here I am, a visitor, and they looked at me like I had 10 horns on my head, and they spoke to me in a very slow manner, like very slowly, and they asked me funny questions, and um, I felt it was a huge school. Um, I mean, the city is, Westport is a very, I don't know if you're familiar, it's very opulent, very, very wealthy small town, but it's a tiny little town. It's not New York City. It's not, I come from Moscow, and I imagined New York City. In addition to which, I missed my mom. I missed my sister. I missed my mom. And every 5 days, I had to go back to the city, and then Sunday I was driven back to Westport. I was crying hysterically. I was overworked. I had to take many classes. I had to get ready for tests, for SATs, achievements, TOEFLs. And usually your senior year in school is pretty light, but I had taken so many extra courses, college applications. Everything was wrong, and it probably would have been wrong, I don't know, maybe elsewhere, but my mom, and I described that very, in a lot of detail in the book, but finally we just made a decision for me to come back to New York. And the second I came back to New York, and the school in Westport was excellent. It was one of those excellent public schools that opened doors for you into the future, and we were advised against me leaving that place, but and I lived with this in this very perfect American family that had many rules, but that's not how I lived my life. My family didn't have rules. That's not how we lived. We didn't sit for dinner at 7 o'clock every night, in my crazy Russian household. Everything was different. And but the second I came to New York, everything clicked. Nobody looked at me in a strange way. I went to a tiny school on 78th Street. There were 10 people in my grade, 45 people in the entire school. Nobody looked at me funny. Nobody looked at me as if I were a foreigner. I walked to school from my apartment. I was in this insane city of millions. I did not feel lonely.
Mm.
It's a city where you can feel lonely, but at the same time, it's very easy not to feel lonely, you know. And immediately, I felt in that school, I felt like I was part of. I hate the word community, but I was part of people. I was part of everybody, and everybody was part of me. And it didn't matter whether I mean, I started speaking English. I knew people understood me. I understood them. I was part of every single play. I was in the Shakespeare competition. It was exactly what I was looking forward to when I was thinking of America a long time ago. Before that, and that's when I started adjusting. Without even thinking that I was adjusting.
Hmm. Yeah, you
And
felt some sort of belonging, I guess, and
yeah,
you just felt you relaxed, you felt accepted, that feeling of belonging settled in. You didn't have to repeat yourself because you spoke English with an accent, or people could tell that you're from somewhere else. I guess I don't know if there were other kids in the space who were from elsewhere, but I suppose New York is filled up of immigrants, so I suppose it was normal for everybody, yeah?
that it was normal. The school itself was a bit like it was a very artistic school. It's I don't know if you know, it's part of the Waldorf schools, Rudolf Steiner. It was a very, it has a certain feel to it in general, but it was very accepting, and I just felt free and accepted. And for that moment, for that year, for that time in my life, it was a perfect solution for me, and that was exactly what I needed, because I was definitely I was not okay. I think as much as I wanted to be in America, it was not okay.
Join us again next time for part 2 of this episode. We thank our listeners around the world, and we appreciate your continued support as we build our human library. Please remember to give us a 5-star review, subscribe, and share with your friends, family, and circle of influence.